Wait, what do you mean they updated sluices? Where's my sluice over here? What is this valve? Wait, no, I've got a better question. What on earth are all of these? Okay. We need to discuss what just happened to Timberborn. Because Timberborn just went from being the best city builder to an even bester city builder. Well, the developers over here have just added automation to Timberborn, and you start unlocking its benefits as soon as you unlock gears for yourself. The first thing that you can do is get yourself a lever. At this point, it's not really automation. However, as soon as you have this on your map, you can basically click on any building, click the automate button and select that lever. In our case, for example, let's just select all of these breeding pods, okay? So we're gonna set this one to be controlled by this lever over here, and then we're gonna copy these settings to basically all of our breeding pods. That sounds good, right? However, what we're gonna do is come over here and turn this on. And yeah, a beaver doesn't need to come and turn it on. And now you can control all of these buildings with a single button. Now that's the manual method of automation, but you can basically link any building to this over here. Let's discuss the more automated means of automation, shall we? Let's place ourselves a population counter. However, the population counter needs metal parts, which is exclusive to the iron teeth, okay? And for those of you playing the folktales, don't you worry because the population counter over there uses paper. Now let's get back to our population counter over here because we are gonna automate this instead of using the lever. There we go, let's just wait for it to get built over here and oh my god does it look cute. So what does it do? Well, the population counter has two controls. You can either measure the population of the district that's linked to this path over here, or you can measure the population on the entire map. And holy moly are there a lot of things that you can measure, okay? In my case, I simply wish to maintain at least 5 unemployed beavers. We currently have 42 unemployed beavers, which is greater than or equal to 5. Therefore, the output over here is on. Now you could of course use this output to control your breeding pods, and yeah, maybe there's a way for me to avoid using logical operations, but no, we're not going to. Let's place ourselves a relay. And what the relay does is you can give it any of the other automation buildings as an input. In this case, we're just going to use the population counter. And this not option over here is simply going to flip it. So since this is on, then this is going to be not on, which is off. Let's rename this relay to something that makes sense, right? Which is that it's counting less than 5 vacancies. And now we're just going to change all of our breeding pods to activate or deactivate themselves. No, not you, Mr. Hauling Post. You don't need to be automated. Based on the output of this relay. By the way, I could have just done this over here. If it's less than 5 vacancies, then turn it off. But I wanted to show off how the relay works, okay? I don't think we need the lever anymore, right? We're gonna be automating everything from now on. Did I miss any breeding pods? I think I did. Yeah, there's one over here. Yeah, that should be it for now. And you know what? We're gonna change this to 10 instead of 5. Lovely. Next up, we're going to take a look at the flow sensor over here, and honestly the flow sensor is not really helpful in this place. But basically it lets you measure the water that is flowing underneath it. So in this case it is 0.9 meter cube per second. And then you can set a threshold, and if the water is above or below that threshold, the flow sensor turns on or off according to that. Next up, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be placing a depth sensor right over here. There we go. And let's just set this down to say 3.5, right? Yeah, why not? Alright, we've just renamed this to something sensible, such as reservoir is greater than 50%. It's not really 50%, but you know. And what that's gonna let us do is come over here to all of these water pumps. We're gonna automate them, and we're gonna select that sensor over there. And obviously, once more, we just need to paste these settings to all of these pumps. And we basically just automated our pumps to turn off during a long drought or bad tide. When the water level falls below this point, all of our water pumps are gonna turn off. From now on, there's no point in separating your irrigation water and your water pumps. And finally, we are able to talk about the replacement for sluices, which is this contamination sensor over here. Yeah, let's just place one right here. Right, as soon as that is built, now what we can do is get rid of this old sluice gate over here, and we are going to be placing a valve in its place. Okay, now we're going to be automating this valve based on this contamination sensor, and we're going to call this contamination sensor the bad tide detector. Now you sir, we need to flip your things, okay? Actually, wait a second. it's not a bad die detector. It's actually a good die detector. Because if this is on, then we need to turn this valve on, which is exactly what's going on right now. However, we do need a relay. Now we could place these wherever we want, but I like it when things make sense, okay? And this relay is basically gonna flip the output of this good die detector. So this relay is technically the bad die detector. And then based on the output of this relay, which is not the good die detector, we are gonna be controlling the valves which we place over here. So let's upgrade this place, shall we? We're gonna just destroy these at the bottom, and we're gonna replace them with the brand new valves with levees on top, of course. Now let's just extend this path over here. Now these three, they are synchronized with adjacent valves. Okay, now these three are basically gonna be automating based on the good die detector, and these three over here are gonna be automating based on the bad die detector. And these should turn off right now. Why didn't you turn off? Oh, you also need to set what off and on means. Okay, never mind. Okay, so when it's off, yeah, the flow limit needs to be 0, and when it's on, the flow limit needs to be unlimited. Yeah, that's much better. And I guess the same settings need to be put over here as well. So when you're on, you can just flow as much water as you want. However, when you're off, you need to just stop. Hopefully they change it so that by default the off state is 0, otherwise it's gonna cause a lot of problems for people. Now there was one more function that the sluices could actually do, which was this thing over here, filling up ponds and stuff underneath them. Thankfully they can still do that, however, you are going to need a depth sensor now. Yeah, because the valve cannot do its own downstream measurement, so basically you have to do it with a depth sensor. We're just going to measure it down over here so that it's at 0.6. Actually, let's just do 0.75. Now, I don't want all of this water flowing down, so we're going to place a temporary levee over here. Perfect. So that we can destroy this sluice gate and replace it with a valve. There we go. And now we can destroy that levee again. Now, this sluice over here needs to be linked with this depth sensor, otherwise it's gonna overflow and fill up all the water, okay? Yeah, we're just gonna call this Lake 1, okay? And then this valve will listen to Lake 1, and based on that output, it's gonna either turn on or off. So let's see how this works. And there we go, the valve turned off. There was some sloshing around over here, but that's expected. We can actually control that sloshing by limiting the flow rate down here. So instead of unlimited, you can just flow at say 0.5. We don't really need a lot of water flowing down from this place anyway. So even 0.5 is going to be fine. And that should be the sluice replacements done. But as you can see, we still have a lot of sensors and stuff. So we're just going to go through them quickly. The chronometer over here can turn on or off depending on the times. And yes, it can also just turn on or off depending on whether or not people are currently working. That is kind of insane if I'm being honest. You can use the chronometer to turn off selective industries during certain times of the day. Oh, and I just noticed that the explosives factory can make fireworks now. Okay, that's insane. The weather station checks if there's a drought or a bad tide, or if there's neither. The power meter can actually check basically everything in your current power grid. Well, not the current power grid, in the power grid that's attached to it. And then you can turn off buildings and whatnot based on that. Alright, then we have the science counter, which you can basically use to enable or disable your inventors and number crunchers and whatnot. I really don't think there's any other reason to have these. And the indicator over here is really fun, because you can turn it on or off, because you can change its color and turn it on or off based on a bunch of different logics, okay? Oh, and of course you can play your own sounds from the speaker. And now, the most overpowered thing in the game is going to be the resource counters. So let's just place a couple over here. Now one of you is going to be measuring planks and the other one is going to be measuring gears, okay? So if planks are less than 500, you're going to turn on. And if gears are less than 200, you're going to turn on. And then of course the gear workshop is going to respect the gears over here. And then the lumber mill is going to respect the planks over here. Oh, I have another gear workshop as well. Copy, paste. By the way, if you press a building and you press V, then you can copy its settings to something else. Lovely. These resource counters basically mean that your buildings don't have to keep using power when they're not working. So that is amazing. I've been wanting that feature since I started playing Timberborn. And finally, you can optimize your power needs. The firework launcher lets you launch fireworks. The detonator is the weirdest thing. It can be placed on top of dynamites and then it arms it based on the condition. The timer basically lets you do a lot of time-based processing over here. So for example, if the population control turns on, it will wait 1 hour, which is this T1 over here, before this output turns on. And of course, if A turns off, then this will wait 4 hours before turning off. Or you can just change this to 1 as well. Yeah, honestly, this is not for me. Someone is gonna make some really fun stuff with this. We also have the memory module, which basically turns on permanently even if something turned on for a small time. And then it needs to be reset with another signal. So a memory module combined with a couple of population controls can let you do some really fun stuff with your population. So you can keep building it up until it reaches a certain point and then let it fall back down. I'm not sure if that's legal. And then finally something for the streamers, which is, yeah, the HTTP lever and the HTTP adapter. So streamers can basically hook this up into their chats and let people wreak havoc across their colony. I cannot wait to come up with some fun stuff, okay? These are the basic building blocks of automation. Instead of the developers like letting us set up conditions over here, some really basic things like, oh yeah, when there's enough planks you can turn off, they said, you know what? We're gonna let you come up with your own automations and we're gonna give you the tools you need to do whatever you want. Insane, if I'm being honest, insane. We are currently doing a playthrough of the newly updated waterfalls map, and I'm going to be using all of these automation thingy-majiggies over there. We are only a handful of episodes into that playthrough right now, so link is going to be on the screen right now for you to catch up.